Hello, my friends. It's time for another story. I'm very excited about this one. It's one of my other favorites. It's by the same author of the last book I read, William Steig, not Sneeg, William Steig. And it's very peculiar what happens in this story. It's a little bit sad, but also very exciting. And it might be one of those things that your parents say, like, when you complain about how things are really annoying or really hard, or life's being stupid, or if you're having a really crummy day and you're like, this is the worst day ever, and then your parents are like, well, it could be worse. You could have this, or you could be like this, or you could live here, or whatever. You should be grateful for what you have. But this book is a really good example of being grateful for what you have and not complaining. But it's also really funny, but also sad, but also it has a good ending. So I'm going to turn the camera around and read to you Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. And maybe by the end, you'll realize why you've got it pretty good. Okay, here we have it. Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. I have a magic pebble on my bracelet here that I collected a long time ago, and Bernice has really gotten into making bracelets lately, so I was making bracelets with them, and this is the bracelet I have. I also have some clay on my hand because I was mixing up some clay earlier. Okay, so here we have the characters of the book. What's going to happen? Sylvester and the Magic Pebble by William Steig. This is an old book from 1969. So it's kind of like a cool old-fashioned way of talking. Sylvester Duncan lived with his mother and father at Acorn Road in Oatsdale. One of his hobbies was collecting pebbles of unusual shape and color. Do you like to do that? Me and Bernice really like doing that. We go to the Crystal Ark on Gravel Island and buy crystals, and we look for cool rocks in the woods, or like just on the road or wherever we're walking. And Bernice sometimes finds even stuff at school in the playground. There's some really beautiful rocks out there. And they all have kind of like interesting magical powers, I'd say. On a rainy Saturday during vacation, he found a quite extraordinary one. It was flaming red, shiny, and perfectly round, like a marble. As he was studying this remarkable pebble, he began to shiver, probably from excitement, and the rain felt cold on his back. I wish it would stop raining, he said. To his great surprise, the rain stopped. It didn't stop gradually as rains usually do. It ceased. The drops vanished on the way down, the clouds disappeared, everything was dry, and the sun was shining as if rain had never existed. Very peculiar. Why did that happen? In all his young life, Sylvester had never had a wish gratified so quickly. It struck him that magic must be at work, and he guessed that the magic must be in the remarkable-looking red pebble, where indeed it was. To make a test, he put the pebble on the ground and said, I wish it would rain again. Nothing happened, but when he said the same thing holding the pebble in his hoof, the sky turned black, there was lightning and a clap of thunder, and the rain came shooting down. What a lucky day this is, thought Sylvester. From now on, I can have anything I want. My father and mother can have anything they want, and my relatives and my friends and anybody at all can have everything anybody wants. He wished the sunshine back in the sky, and he wished a wart on his left hind fetlock would disappear, and it did, and he started home, eager to amaze his father and mother with his magic pebble. He could hardly wait to see their faces. Maybe they wouldn't even believe him at first. Sometimes wishing for everything you want doesn't always turn out exactly how you might think it will. I wonder what will happen now. Ooh, a grumpy lion is approaching. As he was crossing Strawberry Hill, thinking of some of the many, many things he could wish for, he was startled to see a mean, hungry-looking lion looking right at him from behind some tall grass. He was frightened. If he hadn't been so frightened, he could have made the lion disappear, or he could have wished himself safe at home with his father and mother. He could have wished the lion would turn into a butterfly, or a daisy, or a gnat. He could have wished many things, but he panicked, and he couldn't think carefully. I wish I were a rock, he said, and he became a rock. The lion came bounding over, sniffed the rock 100 times, walked around it, and went away confused, perplexed, puzzled, and bewildered. "I saw that little donkey as clear as day. Maybe I'm going crazy," he muttered. He does look very confused, but oh no, now Sylvester's a rock. What's he gonna do? This is the sad part of the story. And there was Sylvester, a rock on Strawberry Hill, with the magic pebble lying right beside him on the ground, and he was unable to pick it up. See, there it is. "Oh, how I wish I were myself again," he thought, but nothing happened. He had been touching the pebble to make the magic work, but there was nothing he could do about it. His thoughts began to race like mad. He was scared and worried, being helpless. He felt hopeless. He imagined all the possibilities, and eventually he realized that his only chance of becoming himself again was for someone to find the red pebble and to wish that the rock next to it would be a donkey. Someone would surely find the red pebble, it was so bright and shiny. But what on earth would make them wish that a rock were a donkey? The chance was 1 in a billion at best. Sylvester fell asleep. What else could he do? Night came, with many stars. Meanwhile, back at home, Mr. and Mrs. Duncan paced the floor, frantic with worry. Sylvester had never come home later than dinner time. Where could he be? They stayed up all night wondering what had happened, expecting that Sylvester would surely turn up by the morning. But he didn't, of course. Mrs. Duncan cried a lot, and Mr. Duncan did his best to soothe her, but both longed to have their dear son with them. "I will never scold Sylvester again as long as I live," said Mrs. Duncan, "no matter what he does." At dawn, they went about inquiring of all the neighbors. "Have you seen Sylvester?" "Oh no. This is very sad." Can you imagine if you turned into a rock and you couldn't be with your parents anymore? They talked to all the children, the puppies, the kittens, the colts, the piglets. No one had seen Sylvester since the day before yesterday. They went to the police. The police could not find their child. All the dogs in Oatsdale went searching for him. They sniffed behind every rock and tree and blade of grass, into every nook and gully of the neighborhood and beyond, but found not a scent of him. They sniffed the rock on Strawberry Hill, but it smelled like a rock. It didn't smell like Sylvester. How is this going to get sorted out? After a month of searching the same places over and over again and inquiring of the same animals over and over again, Mr. and Mrs. Duncan no longer knew what to do. They concluded that something dreadful must have happened and that they would probably never see their son again, though all the time he was less than a mile away. They tried their best to be happy, to go about their usual ways, but their usual ways included Sylvester, and they were always reminded of him. They were miserable. Life had no meaning for them anymore. I feel really bad for them. That would be so scary. Your child just disappears and you don't know where they went. Night followed day and day followed night over and over again. Sylvester on the hill woke up less and less often, and when he was awake, he was only hopeless and unhappy. He felt he would be a rock forever, and he tried to get used to it. He went into an endless sleep. The days grew colder, fall came with the leaves changing color, then the leaves fell and the grass bent to the ground. Then it was winter. The winds blew this way and that. It snowed. Mostly the animals stayed indoors, living on the food they had stored up. Oh, look at this wolf. Looks very sad. One day a wolf sat on the rock that was Sylvester and howled because he was hungry. Then the snows melted, the earth warmed up in the spring sun, and things budded. Leaves were on the trees again, flowers showed their young faces. It looks like a lovely meadow. I'd like to go there, smell all the flowers, have a picnic, like the donkeys are gonna do. One day in May, Mr. Duncan insisted that his wife go with him on a picnic. "Let's cheer up," he said. "Let us try to live again and be happy even though Sylvester, our angel, is no longer with us." They went to Strawberry Hill. Mrs. Duncan sat down on the rock. The warmth of his own mother sitting on him woke Sylvester up from his deep winter sleep. How he wanted to shout, "Mother! Father! It's me, Sylvester! I'm right here!" But he couldn't talk. He had no voice. He was stone dumb. It's like torture. Mr. Duncan walked aimlessly about while Mrs. Duncan set out the picnic food on the rock: alfalfa sandwiches, pickled oats, sassafras salad, Timothy compote. Suddenly, Mr. Duncan saw the red pebble. "What a fantastic pebble!" he exclaimed. "Sylvester would have loved it for his collection." And he put the pebble on the rock. They sat down to eat. Sylvester was now as wide awake as a donkey that was a rock could possibly be. Mrs. Duncan felt some mysterious excitement. "You know, Father," she said suddenly, "I have the strangest feeling that our dear Sylvester is still alive and not far away." I am, Sylvester wanted to shout, but he couldn't. If only he'd realized the pebble resting on his back was the magic pebble. Will he realize? "Oh, how I wish he were here with us on this lovely May day," said Mrs. Duncan. Mr. Duncan looked sadly at the ground. "Don't you wish it too, Father?" she said. He looked at her as if to say, "How can you ask such a question?" Mr. and Mrs. Duncan looked at each other with great sorrow. "I wish I were myself again. I wish I were my real self again," thought Sylvester. And in less than an instant, he was. Look at that. You can imagine the scene that followed. The embraces, the kisses, the questions, the answers, the loving looks and fond exclamations. Look how excited they are. Can you imagine? What an incredible thing. When they had eventually calmed down a bit and had gotten home, Mr. Duncan put the magic pebble in an iron safe. Someday they might want to use it, but really for now, what more could they wish for? They all had all that they wanted. The end. Oh, what a happy, happy ending. All right, I'll turn this around and we can talk about this awesome book. Oh my gosh, you know what I just did? I just recorded a whole video of me talking about this book, and then I forgot to press record. So I just did it to nobody, but I'm gonna do it again because I'm like that, and I want to talk about this awesome book. So what do you think of this crazy story? It feels like kind of a cruel punishment for Sylvester to have to go through all of that torture of becoming a rock just so that we can learn as readers that we should be grateful for what we have. I think he was already pretty grateful for what he had. It wasn't like he was going around complaining about anything. Why did he have to learn that hard lesson? But what a cool book, hey? I love how William Steig writes these stories that are like kind of horrifying and also incredibly exciting and happy at the end. And there's such good descriptions of everything in them. But the other thing I was thinking about is how important it is for us to tell stories from our own lives, because I think that when you remember stories from your own life, you think about them in a certain way and they just seem kind of obvious and kind of normal. But then when you tell them to someone else, the other person gets to hear them with fresh ears and they've never heard the story before. And so it's kind of like magical for them to hear it. So I thought I'd share a story with you from my childhood that I wrote down the other day in a letter to some friends of mine, because some friends of mine have moved a little ways away and I don't see them very much anymore, and I miss their kids, so I thought I'd write them a story from my childhood. And the story goes like this. So when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I lived in Manitoba, which is in Canada. It's a flat part of Canada. It's called the Prairies, and it gets very, very cold in the winter and lots of snow. And the reason why this is important to note is because, oh shoot, my headphones are gonna run out of batteries. I gotta charge them. I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Had to charge my headphones. They were beeping in my ears. Anyways, so the reason why it's important to note that is because we lived in a house trailer, which is like a long metal rectangle. And it got very cold in the wintertime. So what my dad would do is he'd take these hay bales, these big rectangle hay bales, and he'd stack them up around the house for extra insulation in the wintertime so it wouldn't be too cold in the house. And in the summertime, he would stack them up in the yard and we would use them kind of like a fort. There would be like a little alcove on the inside to hang out in as a fort. And it was a big high stack. It was about 8 feet high. And it was around that time in my life when I realized I think I might be able to fly. and I had started practicing by jumping off my bunk bed. And every time I jumped off my bunk bed, I could feel that, like, just for a few milliseconds, I was floating, I was flying just before I hit the ground. And I thought, you know what? I bet if I jumped off those hay bales in the middle of the yard, I would probably fly for a little bit longer, maybe like 2 seconds. So I ran outside and I got up on the hay bales that were very high, and I jumped right off. And I landed very, very hard and did not fly. And my knees shot right into my diaphragm. And immediately I started making this weird noise. And it was like this. Have you ever made that noise before involuntarily? It's a pretty horrible feeling, getting the wind knocked out of you. And if you haven't had it ever done, don't try it. It's very uncomfortable. But it didn't dissuade me from trying again with an umbrella, because I thought, oh, if I just use an umbrella, I bet I won't hit quite as hard. And I managed to knock the wind out of myself 2 times, mooing on the ground without being able to breathe. Every time I try and take a gasp, I'd be like, oh! So that's a story from my childhood that brings back funny memories. And every once in a while, I tell my kids to remind them how dumb I was and how they shouldn't jump off of an 8-foot high bale of hay. Do you have any stories like that? Any funny stories where you did something silly or like hurt yourself or made a mistake? If you feel like telling me, you can send me a little note or a little video. And also recommend any books that you've been reading lately that you think are really good. Maybe I can find them at the library and read them on the next story time. Anyways, I can't believe I deleted that first video, but I did it again. And I'll see you guys soon. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.